Good evening and welcome to this webinar series on SharePoint Framework Deep Dive. So the today's topic of discussion is library components in SharePoint Framework. A few of the housekeeping items, as always, this webinar will be recorded and we will be able to give you with the slides and recording after this webinar. I will request everyone to be on mute. If there are any questions, let them come through chat window and then we will cover those at the end during Q&A session. Okay then, so welcome again for this session on library components in SharePoint Framework. Myself, Nanddeep Nachan, I am Microsoft MVP for Office Apps and Services. Apart from that, I'm a consultant in SharePoint, Office 365, Microsoft Azure, speaker at various conferences, author of a couple of books, and onto the right-hand side, there are some social handlers to get connected with me. So the agenda which we are going to cover today is we will cover like what is mean by SharePoint framework library components or SPFx library components, what they are. Then we will see how we can do the parallel development when we are using library components. And lastly, when there will be a multiple library components involved into your solutions, how we can manage those using a monorepo called as Microsoft Rush. So that is the agenda for today. So let's start with introduction to SPFX library components. So what are the library components? What challenges do we have and how they get resolved using library components? And then how can we access this library components functionality behind the scene using web parts or even using the extensions development? So firstly, library components. So the library component, it was in preview release with the version of 1.8, and then right now it is generally available from SPFX version 1.9.1. So the brief history behind this library component is like it came as an feature request or user voice entry for SharePoint, so that we can create shareable code for our SharePoint framework library. For our SharePoint framework web parts and extensions. So it is generally available with version 1.9.1 onwards, and then it is an alternative option to create a shared code. So the concept is again same like what we had in .NET, wherein we used to combine all of the required code or all of the common code inside one DLL. We used to deploy that DLL in the GAC, and then all of the other components or all of the other code used to refer that common code from that particular DLL. So the same concept lies here, that the library component represents a shareable code which can be accessed by multiple components in SharePoint framework. So it can be a web part or it can be SPFX extension. So these library component types enable you to have independently versioned and deployed code. It provides you an alternative option to create shared code, which then can be used and referenced across all of the components inside your tenant. So in this picture, you can see that we have only one library component, but it is being referred by multiple other components like web parts or even extensions. So then what are these SharePoint library components are? So now that we are going to deep dive into the SharePoint library components. So this feature, as I said, was introduced in the preview in SPFX version 1.8, and then it went GA in 1.9.1 version. So the library components allows you to take common functionality that we may be referencing externally, or we may be rewriting in every single uh, one of our web parts and extensions, and store that common code in an independently managed component that lives in our SharePoint site but can still be accessed from our web parts and extensions. So this SPFX library component is still a SharePoint framework solution that you can create using SharePoint human generator, just as you would create a web part or an extension. The only difference is that the library component is really just meant to supply the functionality to other components like our web parts or extension. As an example on this slide, you can see that you may want to utilize jQuery or Moment.js, or the icon in the middle may represent some of the custom functionality which you are developing. so which maybe our organization needs to access or repeatedly use across all of our web parts or extension. So these library components can be deployed into our SharePoint tenant and make available to all these other SharePoint development assets such as web parts or extensions. So you may think like why this is needed, what solutions does library component provides, or what challenges does it solve. So maybe let's take the otherwise, like what are the challenges we have without having the library components. Okay, so let's think otherwise and start by looking at what challenges would exist without the library components. So if you wanted to access some often or repeatedly used libraries such as jQuery or Moment.js, our first option is to bundle it inside our web part or extension. So this will certainly ensure that it's always available to our web part or the extensions. The only drawback, as you can see onto the right hand side, is that with each component gets loaded onto the page, every time that particular component, maybe jQuery or Moment.js, will get loaded onto the page. So if we are able to put this web part onto the page more than once, each copy of the web part is going to include both Moment and jQuery. So for example, if you have three web parts referencing this Moment.js or jQuery, then all those jQuery or Moment.js will be included into your page for 3 times. If you have 4, then it will be included for 4 times. But what we need is we need it only for one time to uh, to have the functionality implemented across all of these web parts or extensions. Okay, so that means this option is not performance friendly. Okay, so the next thing is obviously comes into the mind is CDN. So another option is to externally reference our functionality. So as you can see in this picture, onto the left hand side, we have our web part bundles. But this time you can see that they don't include Moment.js or jQuery library inside of it, but those are being referenced externally. So maybe using a CDN. So now that they can be stored in a CDN or SharePoint library or some sort of storage mechanism. And just like our first option had drawbacks, this option as well has some drawbacks. So the drawbacks are like we are referencing these files externally, maybe in a CDN that we don't own. So we might be storing them in a SharePoint library that someone could accidentally delete. And these externally referenced libraries do end up getting loaded more than once onto the page. So even though we have CDN, and if that CDN is being referenced in our SPFx solution, maybe in a web part or extension, even that particular CDN, the package which is deployed onto the CDN will get loaded multiple times. So the both of these options that we discuss, they include common and reuse functionality, but they have potential challenges. So then let's see like how these challenges are resolved using library components. Okay, so the library component are going to help solve all these issues. So let's look at the benefits and challenges that are solved by using these library components. So because the library components are still SharePoint framework solutions, they actually get installed into our SharePoint site collections, just like an extension or a web part. So our web parts, which will live on a SharePoint page, which is illustrated in the left side, can access these reusable functionality in our library component. So when we deploy a library component into SharePoint, it's not going to be loaded on a page unless there is a web part that has been pre-connected to the component that use that functionality. So for example, both of these web parts onto the left hand side may use either jQuery or Moment.js, but if neither of them do that, library component will not get loaded on the page at all. So the other benefit that we have is if both of these web parts on the SharePoint page uh, utilize jQuery from the library component onto the right hand side, the library component will only be loaded onto the page only once, and this will help us to increase the performance. Okay, so even though there are 5 web parts existing onto the page, but they are referencing the same library component, the library component will get loaded only one time onto the page. If none of those 5 web parts are connected to library components, in that case, library component will not at all gets loaded onto the page, and then it will help us to increase the performance or overall performance of our page. So few of the library characteristics before we jump into creating a library component. So first one is that you can host only one library component version at a time in a tenant. So that means you cannot have same library component with version 1.1, 1.2, and so on. You can have only one version of component library component at a time in a tenant. And then it is not supported to have other component types included in a solution which contains library components. So if I create a SPFx solution with library components, I should not create any other kind of project. It could be a web part or extension within same solution. And then these library components are not supported when solution is deployed to site collection app catalog. So that means all of this library component has to be deployed to global app catalog. Okay, so at least these are the 3 rules which we will have to always keep in mind whenever we are dealing with library components. Okay, so then let's see like how we should develop this library components. So I will move to my uh, development machine. Let me delete this. Yeah, all right. So here I have one folder wherein we will create the library component. So as I said, library component is again one of the SPFX solution itself. So for that purpose, I will do yo at Microsoft/SharePoint. But this time I will just say dash dash skip dash install. So what this will do is it will not download all of the npm packages which are required, so that we will save upon some time. So we'll just enter this. For example, if you are using any of the SPFX version before 1.8.1, in that case, you will have to use dash dash plus beta, because at that time it was in a beta. So, so the name of the solution, we will go with the default one. We want to target this library components for SharePoint Online only, because it is only available with SharePoint Online. And then we will use the current folder to place all the files. Then the next thing is that whether we want to allow tenant admin the choice of being able to deploy the solution to all sites immediately. And since this is the library component, we should say yes for this option. Then the next thing is, does this library component need permissions to access any of the web APIs? So we don't need those unique kind of permissions. So we will say no. The next thing that you will see here is that we have now 3 options to create the client-side component. So first one is web part, then we have extension, and the third one we have a library. So in this session we are going to cover only library component. So I will select library. Then this will ask me for name of the library. So let's go with hello world, no issues. Description, I don't want to give any descriptions. We will go ahead with the default descriptions. But now that you can see that it hasn't asked me for choice of the JavaScript framework or library I want to use, because as of now we can just have a plain JavaScript code inside this library component. I mean to say TypeScript code. We cannot have any React components or anything as such in library component, because library component doesn't have any visual appearance. It is just providing the common functionality to all of the other components. Okay, so the library component has got created, and since I did not included the npm packages, it saved the time, and now that we just have this library component with us. So let's see the solution structure of this library component. So as like the other components that we saw, this one has got all of those files like gulp.js, tslean.json, and all those things. If we move to the src, we have or the source folder, we have libraries folder inside it. And in this libraries or before libraries, there is one file called as index.ts, which is the entry point. So this is just exporting our library to the outside world. Okay, so this is just one line as we have usually. Then if I move to manifest JSON, here you can see that the component type is library. So this confirms that we have created a library component. So the next thing is the TS file or the actual code for our library. So here you can write your methods which you want to or any kind of an common method which can be used by other web parts or extension. So you can write all those methods here. So by default, library component gives a method called as name, which just returns the name of that particular library. But now that you can use this library to create your own common methods, which can be shared across multiple components. Okay, so with that concept in mind, I will switch to the library component which I pre-created, so that the npm install will save our time. So I will open up this library which I created for maths. This includes few of the maths functions. Those are not overly complicated, but the general maths component that we use. So let me open that in the Visual Studio Code. So again, the same structure as we have for all of the library components, but here I have few more things. So along with the name, which is the out of box function or out of box method exposed by library, I have few implementation of my custom methods which may be used by my web parts and extensions commonly. So I have one method called as get random number, which will just return me a random number between 1 to 10, just mat.random. And then this method will help me to add two numbers, and this method will help me to get the square root of any of the given number. So here we are creating some kind of a math library which we will use inside our web parts. Okay, so again, one thing to note here is that uh, this particular library or this particular solution cannot have any other component inside it. That means it cannot have any of the other library, it cannot have any other web part, or it cannot even have any other SPFx extension. So for that purpose, I have created another solution with this consumer web part. So let me open that as well. Okay. So I'll just open this up, but we will again move back to the library components. And now that we will see like how we can utilize this library component. Okay. So there is something called as npm link, which creates a symbolic link in order for other components to locate your library. So whenever we create a library, first thing that we will have to do is we'll have to build our library. So I will do gulp build, so that it will just ensure that my code is running or it is a buildable. There are no errors inside that code. And once we do that, the next thing that we'll have to do is we'll have to do npm link, so that it is some kind of a symbolic link. Even I will cover that when we will create that link, so that using that symbolic link, all of my other components will be able to locate this particular SPFx library. So for that purpose, I will type here npm link. So this will create some kind of an symbolic link. So let it create, and the symbolic link gets created to your app data folder. So inside app data, we have roaming, npm, and node modules. So that particular linkage gets created here. So now that you can see that the particular link has got created now. So this is something called as a symbolic link. This one has got a linkage or some symbol of a link or a shortcut to my actual code. If I open that up, it is now referring to my actual code inside this node modules. So this is how um, any of my other component will be able to locate this particular library. So first thing is that we'll have to compile the library at least once in order to be able to import it as a module inside different projects. And then one thing will have to remember is that if I move back to my library component, and if I move to the lib folder, one moment. Inside this lib folder, we have something called as index.js. So this index.js will help us to export our library to other components. And then when we will create this npm link or run this npm link, there will be one symbolic link that will get created. Okay, and again there is something called as package.json, inside which we have name of this particular library and version. So using this name and version, we will be able to use this library inside our web parts or extension. So now that we have our web part created, this is again a simple web part created using no JavaScript framework. So what we will do now is we will first try to use that particular link inside our web part. So for that purpose, again, I will move back to command prompt, and I will again type npm link and the name of that particular link which got created. So the name is from here, SPFx match library, or even if you want to see that, it's over here, SPFx match library. So now that we will use that symbolic link so that our web part will be able to locate that particular library component. Okay. So now that my web part is aware of the library component which is right now available in my local environment. So now what I can do is I will import that particular library, like import star as maybe match library. Oh, sorry. From. Okay, so now that I'm just importing that mass library inside my web part. Now that we want to utilize the functions or methods which are available inside that library. So for that purpose, what we will do is we will create one variable. Maybe that variable we can call it as just lib, or maybe maths lib. Okay, I will call it as maths instance equal to new. Then we can again refer back to the same code which we have. So here I will have mass library, which is the import that we have from top dot maths util library, the library which we created. Okay, so by using this particular statement, we are creating one instance of my library component. And now that let's see how we can use this to call a method inside that library component. So I just have copy pasted the same, and I will remove this. Now that we can use this maths instance here. So maths instance dot maybe get random number. Okay. So this should now give us the random number from library component. So for that purpose, I will do gulp serve so that this library, so that this web part will build, and then we will be able to add this particular web part onto the hosted workbench or a local workbench, and then from there we will be able to see like whether it is able to locate that library component and call a method onto the library component. Okay, so it is now running, but the simple thing is that it always runs with this particular symbolic link. So firstly, that you will have to create a symbolic link from your library component. Then the next thing is that you will have to utilize this symbolic link inside your web part, so that you are making your web part aware of the library component that we have onto our local machine. And then from there you can import that library component inside your code, create an instance of it, and then call a method onto that instance. So okay, we have this web part here, and now that we can see this library component has provided us with some random number. If I refresh it again, every time it will generate a random number between 1 to 100. So let's say maybe we'll try to call few other methods from the library component. So this library component has got one more function called as get square root. So let's try to call that particular method. So I will just copy it again, and instead of random number, now that we will call get square root, and maybe we will pass a number as 2, so that the library component should be able to return us the square root of 2. So let it compile. Okay, it is done. So if I move back to my code, yeah, so now that it has written the square root of 2. Okay, so this is how the library components can be used. Okay, so the next thing is now the question is, right now it is working well onto our local environment, because right now the symbolic link is just on my local. It is nowhere onto any of the server or on SharePoint, so that my web parts which are running onto a SharePoint page will be able to locate this particular library. So the next thing is that we will now deploy and consume this library component from a tenant app catalog. So for that purpose, I will terminate this job. I will go back to my library component, which is here. And then here we can do is we can bundle this library component with ship. That means deploy or release a kind of an parameter. So we'll first have a bundle of this particular library component. The next thing is that we will do is we will package the solution for this particular library component. So okay, so instead of bundle, I will say package solution. Okay. So now that it will create a package for our library component. Okay, okay, it is done. So let me move back to the folder. We have no, this is not the folder. Okay, if I move back to my library component here, and then again inside SharePoint, inside solution. So this is the package SPPKG file that got created. So now that we will deploy this SPPKG file to our SharePoint site. So for that, let me open up my SharePoint site. Okay. Let me move to my admin center of my SharePoint site, and from there we will locate the app catalog site, and to the app catalog we will upload this library component. Okay. Okay. So this is the again modern experience of the admin center. You can click more features so that we can even locate the features which were even available with the classic version of SharePoint. Uh, Under apps, click open so that it will open up the tenant admin app catalog. So under this app, click app catalog. So if you already have the app catalog site created, then it will directly take you to that. Otherwise, it will ask you to create your own app catalog first. Then I will click distribute apps for SharePoint, so that it will take me to a place where I can upload the package for library component. So let's click upload here. From choose files, we will locate the library component package which we just created, and then we will upload it to our library. Okay, sorry, to the SharePoint app catalog. And then I will click this checkbox so that this solution will be available to all of the sites inside my organization. And then we will click deploy. So that this library component is now available as a package. So it is deployed at a tenant level with no errors. So this is good for a library component. Now that this library component is available inside my tenant, and all of the web parts and library component or even library components and even SPFx extensions will be able to locate it from this app catalog and use inside them. So now that let's see like how we can use this inside a web part. So I will move to my web part solution, and inside this web part solution we have package JSON from where we every time refer the packages which you want to use inside our web part. So inside these dependencies, now that I will create one dependency for my library component. So again, for that dependency, we will give a name which is the name of our library component, which even you can refer from the package JSON. So this is the name which I will copy from here. And again, we know that the version of this particular library is 0.0.1. So even I will copy it from my library solution, place it here, okay, and put a comma, so that now this particular web part will be able to locate this match library from my tenant app catalog. So let's again deploy this particular web part onto SharePoint site. So for that purpose, we will again do gulp bundle dash dash ship. Meanwhile, let me open up the SharePoint site where we will deploy this. Even I will close out this workbench. Okay. So it is SPDemo is the site where I want to host this particular web part. So let me open up that site and I will go to the site contents of it. Okay. It is still working. Okay. But even now here you can see that there wasn't any error for the dependencies. So that means now it is able to locate that particular web part using the link. So the next thing is that we will do is we will package this particular solution of a web part. So we'll have package solution dash dash ship, so that it will create a SPPKG package for our web part. Meanwhile, I will go back to my SharePoint site, click site contents, uh, and on this particular SharePoint site, I have enabled a site collection level app catalog. So now that we will try to deploy this particular package inside my site collection level app catalog. Okay, now that it has able to create the package, let me move back to my solution, web part solution, SharePoint folder solution, and here we have the package which just got created. So we'll copy the path to this particular package, move back to my SharePoint app catalog. I will click upload, and here we will upload the package for our web part. Okay, this is the library consumer web part that we created. Okay, and now that I will deploy this particular web part to my site collection. So now if I move back to my site collection again, if I refresh this, and from here I will try to add an app. So the app will be the web part which we just deployed. So this is the web part that we have, consumer web part. Let me select that and it will get added to our page. Okay, so meanwhile it is getting deployed to our SharePoint site. Let me open up a page onto which we will use that particular web part. Okay. All right. So here is a page onto which we will add that particular web part, so that we will be able to see whether it is able to make a call to a library which is deployed onto our SharePoint site. Okay, it is still getting deployed. All right. It takes some time depending on how big your package or maybe some random cases. Okay. Okay, it is still getting deployed. Maybe we'll have to wait for some more time. Once you see this web part is enabled onto your site, that means it is available there to use inside your SharePoint site. Okay, it is still taking some time. This may be a demo effect that it is taking the time. Otherwise, when I tested it last time, it was maybe just 20 to 25 seconds it took. All right, it is still working. All right. Oh. Okay, it is still working. All right. Okay, but I think it is installed, because right now it is still giving me option to monitor and remove. So yeah, okay, now it is deployed. You can see this one is enabled now. So I will move back to my SharePoint page. Let me refresh it. So on this page we will drop that particular web part. which will make a call to our library component, and that will call few of the methods from my library component. So I will edit this page, uh, add a web part. Okay, add a web part onto this particular page. So let me expand this. Here we have our web part, maths library consumer. Okay, and now that even you can see that it is able to make a call to a library component. So the first call was to get the random number, which is right now 19, and the next call was to get the square root of 2, which is 1.41. Okay, if I refresh this, it will generate another random number between range of 1 to 100, but the square root will remain the same. Okay, so this is how we can create a library component, and even we can utilize this library component inside our SPFx solution. So again, quick recap of what we done is like we created library component. We just use the option of library whenever we were generating or scaffolding the solution from Yeoman generator. So this will create a library component. Once the library component is here, you will have to add your methods inside this TS file, maybe the custom methods which you want to include, and then you will have to build this particular library. Once the library is built, what you will have to do is you'll have to run the command called as npm link, which will create a symbolic link by which the other components like web parts, other library component, or SPFX extensions, they will be able to locate your library. So that npm link will be created inside your node modules folder for that particular user. And then the next thing is that create a web part and make your web part aware of the library component by again using the npm link command. So this time we will give npm link and name of that particular library from the package JSON, so that it will be able to locate that particular library component. And once it is able to do that, the next thing is that you will have to import the library component like this, and then you will have to create one instance of that particular library component. And once the instance is here, you can call your methods on that particular instance. So this way it will be working on your local environment whenever you want to deploy it onto your SharePoint environment, or to the production environment. In that case, again, you can build and package the solutions. Just that one thing is in the package JSON of your web part or extension, mark a dependency for your library component with the name and the version of library component, which is from the package JSON. Okay, the name and version. And once it is here, you can again build and deploy or package your web part, and then even you can deploy that solution to your SharePoint. And from there, it will be able to locate your library and run this. Okay. So with that, I will close out these solutions because we no longer need these solutions, and we will move to, or okay, let it be here. So the next thing is that now that we saw like how we can develop this library component, how we can deploy this library components. So again, one more thing, like how can we do the simultaneous parallel development with library component and the web parts. So what we want to achieve with this, like whenever we are developing a library component and a web part or extension simultaneously in parallel, we will do the gulp serve both at the same time. And then what are the changes that will be required to avoid some kind of an port conflicts? And then what are the benefits of having the simultaneous parallel development? So first thing is that why do we need that? Like we will do the gulp serve on both library component and web part or extension. Then it will throw us the error on the port which is commonly being used by the library component and a web part. And then there are few of the changes that will be required to be done for the serve.json port for the library component, so that it will ensure that no localhost port conflicts or collision occurs between your solutions. And then again, we can do this safely because it is not any of the other solution, but just that there is a linkage between your library component and a web part. So it is generally done using this npm link. So the benefit of this is that Gulp task runner will watch the changes for both, and then it will automatically rebuild what has been changed. So let's see a demo of this. So at least I close the library component. Maybe I will have to reopen this. So I will just open this library component again. Okay. All right. Until it opens, what we will do is I will gulp serve this library component, and as I said, this library component doesn't have any visual interface. It is just a common set of methods or common libraries which will give the common functionality to other components. So for that purpose, I will use dash dash no browser, so that the gulp serve will not open a browser instance, but that it will just make this library component up and running so that it can be used by other component on my local. So let it do. Okay, it is doing okay. Now that it has done, it hasn't opened any browser instance, but now that the library component is running. So now that I will move back to my web part, and again I will do gulp serve here. Okay, so when I do the gulp serve here, what will happen is that each of the library component, okay, now that it has opened the uh, browser, but you can see the error like cannot get team/workbench.html. The reason is here that it is trying to use this port 4321 onto my local host, but this particular port is already being taken by my library component. So for that purpose, my other SPFx solutions, which is my web part, is not able to run on this same port. Okay, and that's where it fails to load, and we are not able to make any changes to it. So what happens now is that, for example, if I make some changes to my library component, every time I will have to build my library, I will have to generate the npm link, and then again I will have to go back to my web part or extension to check whether my code which was inside my library component works or not. So for that purpose, we want to have some kind of a mechanism by which this library component as well as this web part will run in parallel, so that I don't have to stop running or the gulp serve onto the library component, again go back to my uh, web part and again do the gulp serve there. So we will resolve this port error 4321. Okay, so I will stop this instance as well as I will stop the instance of library component. So if you observe the library component or even any of the solution, so inside config folder, we have something called as serve.json. So this serve.json defines onto which port your web part or solution should run. And since this is just the library component which doesn't have any visual interface, I can safely go here and I can change the port. So maybe I will just say 45. So I want to run this library component on port of 5555 on my local host. At the same time, if I go to my web part and if I go to config and serve JSON, so this one is, oh sorry, I did not open that. Okay, if I go to serve.json for my web part, it is still running on some other port, okay, 4321. All right, so now that we have a library component running on 45s and our web part is running on 4321, which is default. So again, I can safely go back to my library and I will do the gulp serve with no browser because library component doesn't have any visual interface. So let it run, let it occupy the port, and then we will again move back to our uh, web part and try to have the gulp serve there. Okay. Okay. Now that the library component is up and running, I will go back to my web part and do the gulp serve again. So this time, since the library component is running on a different port than the web part, now that it is able to get a lock onto the port number 4321. Okay. Oh, sorry. Now that it is able to locate that port number 4321, and then it has started running. Now that you can see that now it is able to locate to that port 4321 instead of the error which we got previously. And from here now I can go and add my library component. Okay, so for example, if I move to my library component, library component is here. If I go back here and if I try to add one more method, maybe called as public maybe subtract number, and I will have a colon number, one number, and then second number, and we will simply do a subtraction of numbers from here. And what I will do is I will just return a minus b, so that we have oh, it's not with subtract, but okay. So now that we are just subtracting the numbers from here, so what I will do is I will now go back to my web part. Now that you can see that it has quickly compiled my library component. Now if I move to my web part, and now if I try to use that particular function like subtract, it is available here. Okay. So now that you can see here that I did not recompile my library, or I did not create the npm link again, but with using this simple port swapping or port changing mechanism, I was able to make this library component and web part up and running both at the same time, so that I don't have to do a development on library component first, go back to my SharePoint site, go back to my web part project and do the other part of consuming this library. But now that I will be able to make a parallel development of library component and web part both at the same time. If I now move back to my SharePoint site here, if I refresh, now that we will be able to see the subtraction. Okay, so this was very much simple. So using this kind of simple fundamentals, you will be able to have both library components as well as web parts running in parallel. So now the bigger concepts is like how we can use this Microsoft Rush to manage multiple SharePoint framework projects with library components. So now that the question must have come to your mind that I just have created only one library component, but in a real world there can be a multiple library components with dependency on each other. So then in that case, how can we go ahead to implement those kind of a complex project? Because right now we just have created these hello world kind of projects where I just have added, subtracted the numbers, that's fine. But when it comes to a live scenarios, we will have a series of library components um, which are dependent on each other, and then there will be multiple web parts or extensions which will be consuming those library components. So then how can we manage those multi or monorepo kind of an repositories? So whenever there will be multiple solutions involved into your one solution, you can call it as a monorepo. Okay, so this Microsoft Rush is again one kind of a scalable monorepo manager for the web. It helps us to manage larger repositories or monorepos containing multiple node or npm projects with dependencies on each other. So we'll see like what kind of dependencies those could be. So then again, quickly, like who is using this Rush? Then Microsoft itself has developed this Rush internally, and again they are using it for their own development purpose for OneDrive, SharePoint, even Windows Store, Office UI Fabric, and many more things. So for example, if you want to start using this Microsoft Rush, simple thing that you have to do is this is an npm package. So only command you will have to run is npm install -g globally, include @Microsoft/Rush. So this will add the Rush package to your developer environment. So now that we'll see like what is mean by larger SPFx repositories. So let's say I have created one library component called as util library, and then I have another library component called as organization library, which is dependent on this util library, which is consuming few of the functionalities from this util libraries. So there is a dependency between these two library components. And then we have one more web part called as an org app, which is making or which is utilizing this org library. At the same time, I have another web part or extension called as org app 2, which is now using this util library. So there is a I will not say very much complex, but there is a possibility of complexities being questioned from here. Like we may have multiple libraries now dependent on each other, and then there will be multiple web parts or extensions consuming those libraries. So in that case, how should we manage these larger repositories? Because it's not like, for example, if I make a change to um, org library, then only org library should recompile, and then it will be able to or serve the request from this org app. At the same time, if I make any changes to this util library, then this util library should compile. At the same time, even org library should get compiled, and then the dependent apps which are on those libraries. So there is a dependency that we will have to manage ourselves. So to have this particular demo, we will have a simple kind of a thing called as a simple Rush repository, wherein we will create one library and then one web part which is dependent on that particular library. And then we will see like how we can better manage this with Rush. Okay. So for that purpose, I will again move back to my SharePoint environment. Maybe I will close this. I don't need this one. I will even close out the other windows which we don't want now. Let me even close running instances. Just a moment. Okay, let me close even this. I will not need this one. Okay, okay. So here, let's say maybe Rush demo. Okay, this is the one which I already have created. Okay. So here I will create one project called as Rush repo. Okay, so this is a kind of a repositories for your Rush. So one thing is like this Rush works only with NPM version of 8.x, and the second thing is that or okay, maybe we'll cover those when we are doing the demo. Otherwise, it will be too much of things to cover at the start. So I will go back to my command prompt. I will navigate to this particular location, and now that here we will start creating this Rush repository. Okay, so first thing that we'll have to do is npm install -g @microsoft/rush, which I already have done. So now that the another thing Rush is dependent is on Git, so that it will be able to locate the changes using Git, and then only that piece of code it can compile using those Git changes. Okay, so first thing we will have to do is we'll have to run the command called as git init, so that it will initialize a Git. Okay, so that it will help us to locate the smaller changes what we do to our solution. Then the next thing is we will do rush init, so that it will initialize the Rush repository. So whenever it will run this Rush init, there are few things happening into the background, that it has created some git ignore, git attributes, Rush JSON, as well as common folder. So this common folder again has got some configurations for Rush, so which we will cover in a meanwhile. So again, let me go back here. Okay, so now that we have a simple Rush repository created, now what I will do is I will add these changes to Git. I will type git add dot, and then I will again commit these changes to Git. So command is git commit -m, and then I will say added Rush files. Okay, so we just have added these files to Rush, so that now Git can monitor these files for any of the changes happening on them. Okay, so the next line now is that we will create a library. So we will again call this as a corporate library. Okay, so we have created this folder. I will go inside that corporate library folder, and now that here we can create a library. So for that I will type yo at Microsoft/SharePoint and then dash skip dash install. Okay, so that it will skip the installation of npm packages, but it will just create the library component. So okay, so the name of the library component is corporate library. Let it is. Then I want to do it on SharePoint Online. Use the current folder. Okay, I want to use it across my sites. So I will say yes here, and then I don't have any shared or access to the specific web API. So I will say no here. I will create a library here. The name of the library is again corp library, or maybe corporate library. Okay, corporate library, and then the description I will not mention anything. It has created the library. Now we can see that the library structure should be here. The library structure is here. I will not open that library structure. I will move again back to the root folder, and we will now create one app which is over here. Okay, so we just have created this corporate library. Now that we will create this corporate apps. Okay, so corporate apps is nothing but just one SharePoint web part, SharePoint framework web part. So for that, I will create one folder, corporate apps. Okay, and then I will move inside this folder. Okay, now that again I want to create a web part here. So I will say you added Microsoft slash SharePoint dash skip dash install. So again, there are two purposes why I'm using skip install. First thing is that I want to avoid adding the npm packages right away. But the next thing is that these npm packages will be installed by Rush and not by npm. So these are the two reasons I'm using this skip install. So to the solution name here, I will go ahead with the default name. I want to use it for SharePoint Online. I want to use the current folder. I don't want to deploy these solutions directly to all of the sites immediately. My web part doesn't have any special permissions, so I will say no. I want to create a web part here. Name of the web part, let it be hello world. I don't want to provide any description, and maybe no JavaScript. So now that we have our basic functionality ready, I will do or go back to the root folder, and then I will do code dot to open this up in a Visual Studio Code. Okay, before that I missed out on one thing, is I did not add this to my Git. So I will again move back to my corporate apps. I will have git add dash dot and git commit minus m. So added web part. Okay, same thing. I will have to again add my library component to Git. So for that purpose, I will move to my library component. I will again do git add dot git commit dash m. Okay, added library. So now that I have added both library as well as my web part inside Git. So I will move away from this folder. I will go back to my Visual Studio Code. Now that we see here that we have a common folder here, which is only for Rush, and then we have our two folders here, apps and library, which are representing my library component and my app. Okay, so what we'll have to do is we'll need to tell Rush that corporate apps project has a dependency on a corporate library project, and we can do that by updating the dependencies in the package JSON file of corporate apps. So if I move to here and locate the package JSON, so I opened up. Okay. If I open up package JSON, inside this I can specify the dependency here. So the dependency again will be something like corporate library. So the name of the library and then version of the library. Okay, 0.0.1. Okay, so all of the new library that we create will always have version of 0.0.1, and the name will be the name which we created. So now that this is fine, the next thing is that after this we need to configure Rush to work with this repository and the project structure. So for this we'll need to update the Rush JSON file into the root folder. There is okay, if I move to top folder, okay, here is something called as Rush JSON, and this is a huge file. We'll have to take out few of the things from here. So I directly have added all those entries here, which maybe I will reuse. But if you want to go ahead with all of the documentation for this Rush, it is available here. But maybe I will directly use the entries which I have pre-configured. So nothing as such. I'm just specifying the Rush version, npm version, node supported versions. So right now it is 10.13, but we should change it to 8.9.4. So because it is the version which was supported by Rush, so I will just do 8.9.4 here. And then maybe we can use any version until 9. So this Node.js version has to be somewhere between 8.9.4 and 9.0.0. And then again, I'm specifying the dependencies of compilation here, so that every time it should compile the library project first, and then it should compile the web part project. So this is the dependencies which I'm specifying here. So once we do it here, now that we are going to use npm as the package manager, so that we'll have to delete this pnpm file which is available in the common. Then we have config and in the Rush. So there's this pnpm which I will delete because I want to use it from npm. Okay. Then there is something called as experiment.json, which is just and just a file which will have, again I will remove. And then after this it is time to install the npm packages needed by the project in our repository. So for that purpose we will have to run the command rush update. So I will not run this command. The reason is that it will take maybe 5 to 7 minutes just to install all of these packages which are required by this library component as well as by my web part. So once we run this rush update, so this rush will install all of these npm packages specified in the common temp node modules folder, which is here. Okay, so there's a temp folder that will get created once we run this command. So it will run all those or install all those npm packages, and then it will create the symbolic link between those library component and the web part. And once it is done, next thing is that we'll have to do is rush build. So this rush build will build our repositories. Okay. So due to the dependencies added, the corporate package JSON file, Rush will build this library component first and then the consumer project second. So next thing is that we can again use this library inside our web part. So I will make an exit from this particular project. I will open the project which I created beforehand, because this npm install takes too much of time for this. So I have this rush demo project here. I will move to that project, more, run as administrator, cd. Okay, if I open up this code, now that if I again move back, this is the same code which we just developed. Again, we have a corporate library and corporate apps here. Only thing that now that we will do in this web part is that we will ask this web part to use our library. So if I move to this src web parts and then consumer web part.ts, you can see that I'm importing this library here, and then I'm just creating instance of it and using it. So it is here. Okay, so in the console I'm just logging name of that particular lib. So for example, if I had created this first time, then I will have to rush. I will have to do the command rush update so that it will install all those node modules. But now that I already have installed this, just to save the time, so I will not do the rush update. Rather, I will do rush build so that it will build our entire project. Okay. So it might take some time because even rush is bit heavy. So now that you can see that it has skipped the uh, compilation of corporate library, because since it has run last time, there hasn't been any changes, and now that it has started the compilation of corporate apps, which is our SPFx web part. So now that it has said that there are some outdated packages which we will have to update, but not to worry. The major intention behind using Rush is that Rush will maintain the dependencies between libraries and the web part. So we don't have to do any sequential kind of an compilation of the project. So now that what we will do is I will move to my library component. Maybe I will change this library. So I just have made some changes and the Git has detected those changes for me. So now if I move back to again the Rush build, now that previously that it has kept the install compilation of library, but now you can see that it has detected that particular change, and then it will compile that particular library. Now that you can see that it has completed the compilation in 8.87 seconds because there was some change which I made to my library. So let it compile. Maybe I will rerun this command just to show that since we don't have any updates right now, it will skip the compilation of my library. Now that you can see that it has directly skipped the compilation for my library. So this will help you to build some kind of an complex scenarios. So let's say, for example, if you have many library components which are dependent on each other like this one. So in that case, you can just define that hierarchy into the package JSON, and Rush will automatically compile this everything for you based on what kind of changes you have made to your solution. Okay, so that was fairly easy with this simple Rush repository. But as you keep on adding more kind of functionalities, libraries or apps into your SharePoint solution, Rush will be more useful to you. So let's see what are the benefits of using Rush. So firstly, that we don't need to manage the node modules folder individually for each of this project, but this Rush will maintain a common node modules folder. So because we didn't run npm install at any given point of time to install the modules for each of the solution. So Rush will take care by maintaining a common node modules folder. Second thing is that Rush will create a single log file for your entire repository. So I don't have to lock down the dependencies for each of the project individually. So Rush will take care of it as an entire repository. And then Rush will handle all of the linking and unlinking of the library to the SPFx web parts, because when we created this Rush project, we never use a command called as npm link. So this Rush will internally handle all those linking and unlinking. And again, we don't have to run the gulp build multiple times. We just have to run the Rush build only one time, and then this Rush will detect the changes which we had done to our solution, and it will only compile that particular project. Okay, so this will save our time. So Rush will keep track of which web parts dependent on which library inside this package JSON, what we saw, or this Rush config JSON, so that it will compile all those libraries and web parts in a sequence. Okay, then again, based on project dependencies, Rush will parallelize the builds of projects which do not depend on each other. So for example, if there are multiple library components, but those are not dependent on each other, then even the Rush can parallelize the builds for those projects so that it will reduce the build time for your entire project. Okay. So that was about Rush. Again, this is one kind of an complex Rush repository which you can build. So firstly, that we have one library component called as util library. The org library is dependent onto the util library, and there are two apps. One is referring to the org library and one is referring to the util library. So you can maintain the dependencies inside Rush for this, so that, for example, if I just make a change to org library, then only it will compile org library and my org app. At the same time, if I change something in util library, it will compile the entire project. Okay, so this is how Rush will help us to maintain the mono repos. Okay, so okay, we covered this demo part. Then towards the end, like here are few of the cheat sheet for SharePoint Framework library component. For example, whenever you will create a library component, use the command npm link to create a symbolic link for the package folder of a library component. Then, for example, if you want to check where that library component is on your local, in that case, you can run this command npm ls -g and name of the library. So it will help you to locate that particular folder onto your machine. And for example, if you want to unlink your web part from using that library component, in that case, you can simply run npm unlink and library name so that your web part will be unlinked, which was linked during the symlinking of the solution from your library component. And then, for example, if you want to remove the local npm link to the library itself, then in that case, you can run this npm unlink. So at least these 4 commands will help you during your development with SPFx library component. So it is very straightforward concept to use the library component, and it will save your time to build the common repositories as well as uh, duplicating any kind of code. So that you don't have to duplicate any kind of code, just that maintain it as at a single place called as SPFx library component. So here are a few of the references. Most of the part I used in this presentation was from David Warner, who is one of the PNP contributor for library components, and then again from Vardhaman Deshpande, who has showcased this demo of using Microsoft Rush to manage the mono repos with library components. So you can even check out a few of these references. It will help you to create more effective library components inside your SPFX solutions. And with that, thank you very much for attending this. And next session we have is on next Wednesday by Jajit Chopra on demystifying versioning of SPFX solutions. So thank you very much. And then now we are open for Q&As. Okay. Can